Hi everybody, welcome to Readers of the Lost Art. And is this on your channel, Darren?
I hope so.
Yeah,
Yes, it should be.
Darren MaGee and all things narcissistic. And I've introduced Stuart. People who follow my channel should have met Stuart by now, but we've named him the channel Gimp.
Yeah, the Proustian Gimp.
I interviewed him for the post. He was the only candidate, and I reluctantly appointed him.
It took me some persuasion, though, for it to get the job.
So Stuart, for those who don't know him, lives in Madrid, and he refuses to speak Spanish. He only eats fish and chips and drinks lager.
That's right.
Anything else I've missed out, Stuart?
No, that's it, Paul. That's everything.
So we got you on, Darren. We might be joined by Richard. I'm renaming him Richard Diva Grannon because he's increasingly unreliable. And I think we forgot to give him all his. We forgot to take out the green M&Ms in the green room, so he might have stropped off. But Richard may or may not join us. But we, Stuart and I, have been tearing through in search of lost time, stroke, remembrance of things past.
Yeah, we've done page 11 after 5 or 6 hours worth.
So it's like Zeno's paradox, isn't it? Who will win, the tortoise?
Yeah.
Or the snail?
Paul, you're going to have passed away. You're going to have departed this world before we finish. So I'm going to have to. I will become old, and I'm going to have to find a Gimp for myself then. So
well, little do you know, Stuart. Despite looking old, I'm only actually 45. So this is what people don't realise.
You're only 3 years older than me. Wow,
I'm older than you. Really,
I'm joking, Darren. And as we've just established, Darren is very quick on the uptake.
Bless him.
So, Darren, we have obviously been immersed in all things Proustian. You're a Proustian virgin, aren't you?
I am indeed. Yes, it's my first time.
And what was your initial impression?
I find it interesting as I've started reading it. I like the concept, some of the things that come up, and I thought this was interesting. I took a break from reading just for a little while to have a look, because there are a lot of parallels with the work of Freud, who I guess would have been a contemporary at the time, looking at things like both voluntary and involuntary recall, association, the unconscious, and so on. And I thought that was there were interesting parallels. Now I can't find, so maybe one of you gentlemen, or maybe even someone in the comments, is there any reference to either Proust reading Freud or Freud reading Proust because of those parallels? I just think it's really interesting.
He was very well read. So he, for example, the main philosophical influence was he was the best man at Henri Bergson's wedding, and Henri Bergson was a philosopher of time. But he was I'm pretty positive he was well up on his Freud. And but even with the Bergson, it's one of these dangers that I think Proust said that he said a phrase, the words to the effect of, any novel that has a theory behind it is like a piece of clothing with the price tag on it. So he didn't like to follow. So if he was influenced by Freud, he didn't do it in a systematic, schematic way. He was very true to the artistic form of the novel. And likewise, although he was influenced by Bergson, he actually, Bergson believed that you could actually, you could access, if you concentrated, you could access your involuntary memory in a more scientific fashion, whereas Proust was much more along the lines of you can't control it. So in the famous Madeleine instance, he really, really concentrates after he gets the initial burst of memory, but then it just gets weaker and weaker. He can't control how he remembers it.
Yeah, and that is common sometimes. What happens is we'll have a memory, and a lot of the times we remember something, it is through association. And I think Proust is very good at showing that. Seeing things like the lantern, remembering or waiting for the kiss, his mother's kiss, and so on. A lot of times, sometimes it feels like something pops into our head, and sometimes it does. So a lot of memories are just ideas, or just spontaneous, they pop in there. But other time there's been some kind of association which reminds us. And if you think of maybe lying in bed late at night, you can't sleep. We've all had insomnia, we've all had those nights. and how our mind drifts from, it feels like it's drifting from one thing to the other. But a lot of the time, it's the association leads us on to something else, which leads us on to something else, and on and on. And I think Proust is very good at showing that.
Stuart, you got anything to add?
Yeah, so there's, it's not necessarily Freud, although I would say I would agree with Paul, Darren, and say that he's in this circle, this intellectual circle in France at the time when Freud's ideas were very, very popular. So there would have been some, not necessarily correspondence with Freud directly, but he would have been aware of it. But the Bergson question is quite interesting because he does say in an interview, I think it was this final interview, Paul, I've just got it down here. I'll get the newspaper. It was the Eli Joseph Bois was the journalist, and he basically said, my work is based on the distinction between involuntary and voluntary memory, a distinction which not only does not appear in Monsieur Bergson's philosophy, but is even contradicted by it. So in a sense, he was denying there that Bergson touches on these aspects, but Proust's own ideas are his own. So he's very specific. But it's a lot of speculation in research and academia. Is like, how much was he influenced by other thinkers? And I think Bergson is the one that's the case we can argue for.
And if I could approach it tangentially, which is my specialism, Darren, I never answer a question directly if I can possibly help it. I do think, and this you have to contextualize what I'm about to say by the fact I've been reading a lot of Jacques Lacan at the moment, which tends to mess with your head, and B, everything's seen through a Lacanian lens all of a sudden just because that's what you're reading, the most recent thing. So it's one of the disadvantages of slowly becoming senile. But Jacques Lacan's work, I think Proust prefigures it, because Proust writes a lot about desire. And what I find fascinating, and it doesn't really come through until unfortunately you've read the whole bloody 6 or 7 volumes, depending on how it's divvied up in your edition. But so in my edition, it's 6 volumes. So if I keep referring to 6 volumes, I am aware technically I think there are 7. But with desire, in Lacanian theory, you're always circling around this petty objet, this inaccessible kernel that you can't ever get to. And throughout the 6 volumes, whenever he has an epiphany, it's often described in terms of he feels very, very close to understanding something, but he can't quite touch it. And that happens 6 or 7 times throughout the novel, these key epiphanies. And so that's one thing, this feeling like you can touch the essence of reality, but not quite. But the other thing is in relationships, which may be of more interest to you and your work, but the idea that desire is this distance-laden thing. And there's a phrase I'm dredging up from a memory, but basically he makes some explicit statements in the novel about love only being something that's about to come rather than you actually can hold it in your hands. Because the minute, if you go through all these relationships he has, Albertine, Gilbert, Odette with Monsieur Swann, there are all these relationships that the minute the person gets the object of their desire, they can't stand them anymore. And this actually is what keeps me going, because I'm convinced that Sydney Sweeney never picks up her underwear and would never do the dishes. So I'm lucky that I've never gone out with her. I wouldn't like her anyway. And I find this a much healthier way to approach life. Whereas if you have these desire driven by these unreasonable expectations, but that's the nature of desire he's always describing.
Yeah. It's what's known as idealizing. What we do is we idealize. If you were to look at it through now, Carl Rogers came decades later. He's 20th century, mid to late 20th century. If you look at it through a Rogerian lens, there's the difference, the strain, if you will, between the real and the ideal. It's that distance that it gets filled with what he would call incongruence. So whenever we meet someone, or if we take a new job or whatever it is, there's an idealized version that we create. What happens after a while when we get to know each other, or we get that job and we get into the way of things, or whatever it happens to be, we start to see the real. And what we can often do is we tend to negotiate. We recognize expectations, things like that, reasonable, unreasonable, the difference between meeting them and managing them. But then there are other times, and this is something you had mentioned earlier on about narcissism. What sometimes happens in those relationships is the ideal is sort of like held, it's kept there, it's the fantasy, if you will. And one person can never reach it, and the other person is punishing them for not reaching it. You know, so it becomes like I don't know if this is the right way to articulate it, but it's like it's held, the fantasy is held hostage, if you will.
So can I clarify at this point? What I'm hearing, Darren, is that my wife is actually one of the most unique people on earth because she has broken through the anomaly and she has achieved the absolute fantasy in reality. Would that be an accurate assessment of what you're saying?
I've never met your wife, but I'll take your word for it.
But from what you know from me, I am the idealized, desired object, surely.
Yeah. But the other thing about the idealizing is, just as you say, he's just on the brink of an epiphany. So another aspect of that would be it's what's known as self-actualization. Okay, so we're just about to self-actualize now. Some people would argue that we never truly self-actualize. Just as we learn about ourselves, for instance, there's always more to learn. There's always something else, or there's a new goal, there's a new target, or whatever. So it's like that self-actualization is always just somewhere on the horizon, but we keep on chasing it, and it's what drives, it's what fuels us. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it can be if it's unreasonable, if it's unrealistic, if it's delusional, but other times no. That need to chase something, to understand something, to know something, yeah, it can be quite a healthy thing.
Yeah, it makes
Stuart,
sense.
do you want to tell us? Do you want to say that Darren's talking absolute rot?
No, I think it makes more sense than us too.
No, I could see it in your eyes. I could see you vehemently disagreeing with him. Come on, out with it, out with it. Come on.
No, not at all. No, it makes total sense.
The two gimps are ganging up on you tonight, Paul.
Yeah, but it's not even that it's self-actualization, this distance thing. I think in Lacanian's work, and I think this is what comes through the novel as a whole, it's not just difficult to overcome. It's an innate part of life. The unachievability of the object of your desire is actually life. And it just strikes me that I'm going to do work on this in future, but I've got this lifelong obsession or hatred of bureaucracy. And the reason for that is partly it's this denial of, it's this hiding behind the concept of process. And whenever there's an ethical question asked, it's this fake bureaucratic process will take care of everything, but you never actually face the ethical thing. Whereas what I find fascinating about Proust is process is redefined as life itself, and it's a failed process inevitably, but all you can do is keep going through it around and around and around, and thinking back and remembering and creating your own narrative, and that is the process. That's true process. And all we see around us increasingly in politics, in social media, is this ersatz fake process. And that's, maybe it's just a hobby horse of mine, but process, and I don't find it's not coincidental that I've always been a massive fan of Kafka, and he wrote The Trial in German is called Der Prozess. And there's something in me has always responded to that focus upon. So what I love about Kafka is, in some ways, he's a completely different type of writer to Proust, given that I don't think he ever actually finished a novel. He had all these unfinished novels that have been published as novels. But there's something about him, about the futility of life, about the dark humor. And that's maybe something we could talk about later in Proust, the dark humor. I don't think he gets credit for how humorous some of what he writes about is, the darkness and the bleakness.
Yeah, it's interesting, Paul. I think in terms of the concept of process in Proust, I don't get a sense of negativity of the process. In fact, actually, some of his best descriptions, he's just talking about everyday, day-to-day, everyday habits. As we talked about in a previous episode, we were talking about how he seems to rever nature. He's talking about natural processes. So he's not kind of lamenting that life is, this big drudge and he's trying to remember better memories. I think for him, the whole process of life, the good and the bad, the beautiful and the ugly, it fascinates him. But
But if I could push back, the only example I can think of a truly successful relationship, and even then he betrays her slightly, is Marcel's grandmother.
Yeah.
She's an absolute saint, and I think it's very clever the way Proust presents her. Little daily, little beatific little acts she does all the time. She idolizes Marcel, and the way she's described her, she's genuinely nice to everyone. There isn't a side to her in this cesspit, this snake pit of petty, bitchy people, and the shallowness in the Belle Epoque that Proust is writing about. There's one saintly person. That's the only good, healthy relationship, and everything else. So Monsieur Swann falls in love with, if I can use the Liverpool vernacular, a dirty hooer. she's a courtesan. She cheats on everyone. I think it's unclear whether it's true, but Marcel's friend Bloch at one point claims he diddled her 3 times on a train, Odette, and somebody else. The book's full of people who've claimed to have slept with this woman, Odette. And poor Monsieur Swann, who idolized her and just debased himself to pursue her, finally gets her and then thinks, oh, I don't really like her.
Second thoughts, buys remorse.
It's the real and the ideal. He idealizes her, he gets her, and he finds the real. Yeah. And the two do not meet. They're incompatible. That's what commonly happens in a lot of different situations.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering as well, because you'd mentioned things like, the habits and the different relationships and so on. There is something there that gives a sense of stability, if you will, which we all need to some level. Proust had it as well. He had it in the relationship. He had it with the habit. He had it even when he talks about waiting for mother's kiss. There is comfort, there is stability, there is safety.
Yeah.
I'd also, to jump on the back of that, the Combray, they've renamed, I think in actual real France, it's the town of Illier. They renamed it Illier-Combray because of the novel, because everyone was going there to check it out. But there is a nostalgic element, and Combray is like this Edenic, it's his childhood place that in the countryside, but also in this filthy, overpopulated, over-technologized world we now live in, that there's no Combray. It's gone. It's been destroyed. There's a motorway going right the way through it. I'm really going to cheer viewers up at this point. I'm on one.
You always do, Paul. You always do.
No, but did you get the sense the way he's describing his childhood? No, there'd be 0.00 children having that upbringing. So when he, for example, to give a very specific example from the early pages that Stuart and I are struggling to release ourselves from, he's lying in his bedroom and there's this magic lantern. And I've mentioned it before, but the images of the lantern superimpose themselves on things like the doorknob and they become part of his environment. That's as close as he gets to a fantasy in his childhood. Nearly all of it it's the physicality of hawthorn bushes that he describes in vivid detail at one point outside Monsieur Swann's estate. Flowers, there's a wild currant bush or something coming through his window of his bedroom. There's loads
That's a magic lantern. I forgot I had the photo of it.
All right.
I was in a museum on Saturday and there was a magic lantern and there was a very Jungian synchronicity, and I thought I'll take a picture of it and put it on the show.
All right.
I don't know how it works.
See, for anyone watching, having your own channel GIMP works wonders. The level of research that I wouldn't have found that, and B, I wouldn't be able to show it to anyone because I'm inept. So thank you, Stuart.
Yeah, I'm just improving the quality, Paul.
Extra donut for you.
Oh, thank you.
But what was I saying before you rudely interrupted me with a helpful picture? What was it talking about?
You were talking about the magic lantern, how it creates shadows.
Oh, yeah.
And this becomes part of the world.
And the bedroom.
Yeah, and the idea that this notion of nostalgia, children will not, apart from anything else, as we've now established, the countryside, according to the UK government, is racist. And that's part of the problem. It's this nostalgic time that was, and, the book's called In Search of Lost Time, Remembrance of Things Past. And I do find it quite depressing that children of today will not have the same, they can't have the same experience because of these technological layers that are now in their way of direct experience of reality. And the more I think about it, so the practical thing will be, you know, so few people will read the novel anymore that is describing what came before this tsunami of technology. So the very thing that could give you some release and catharsis from this technological dystopian nightmare that I'm cheering everyone up with, no one's going to access it, and especially children who, when they're getting the screen experience, and he's jumping around the countryside on his own at one point.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen today. All these things that are just very, matter of fact and day to day, no longer exist.
It's true. I think there's a big pushback now, Paul, against technology with kids. I mean, here in Spain, they're supposedly going to try and ban social media for under 16s. But I think it's totally different than having grown up in that environment without having to consciously think, I need to ban this technology. I need to stop my kids using this technology. I need to keep my kids off social media and reduce screen time. For us, it wasn't an issue. We just grew up. Like you say, you're out on your bike after school, you go in the forest, you go for walks and stuff, but to actually have to actively push that on people is tragic.
And as well, prior to the internet and so on, I mean, Paul, you like me, you grew up 70s, 80s and so on. We had 4 TV channels, so you were dependent on whatever it is you wanted to watch. It was on once a week, so you had to make time to watch that thing once a week. Yeah. And if you missed it, you're not going to see it again until the repeat, maybe a year later. So there was that once a week. And also there was nothing mucky, if you know what I mean, went on before 9 o'clock. So kids were generally protected from things they shouldn't really be watching.
Yeah.
No, in fact, it's worse than that. I remember the night Channel 4 came on at 5 o'clock for the first time ever. So I can remember the 3 channels before the 4. Not like you, Darren, you parvenu. But what did you make of the language, Darren? The actual complexity, so-called complexity, because it gets a bad rap. Loads of people say it's unreadable or difficult, and I think Stuart said he didn't find it that way.
No.
It really depends. If I'm reading it, if I'm in the mood, if I'm rested and all the rest of it, yeah, I can find and I can appreciate the flowing sentences that feel as if they just flow one into another, and when you realize it's just actually one big long sentence, it's just separated by a lot of commas and things, and you can see I can get a sense of the beauty in that. It almost, again, like I said earlier on about how our mind will move from one thing to the next, the sentences feel as if they're doing the same. Other times I'm reading it, and again, I could be tired, there isn't enough caffeine in my system or whatever. I could be reading it and I have to go back and reread it again because I haven't fully grasped it. So whether that's just particular parts of the book or whether that's something that's going on with me. But I do like how it's written. I do like his language. I do like how he describes things, and I do like how he can flow from one concept, if you will, to the next.
Yeah. One of the... Sorry, Stuart, go on.
No, go ahead. But I was just going to say, every single how to read Proust guide I've read has said that it's best read if you just take your time and just get into it and kind of flow with it. Don't try to actively digest it. Don't try to actively critique it. It's best when you just go with the flow, and then it's like a thought process.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Can I come out with my etymological nerdiness now? What I find interesting is I think it's years since I've formally studied English literature, but I vaguely remember the notion of predicates. So the part of the sentence that has the verb and any modifiers. And at a very technical level, what he tends to do is delay the predicate. You'll have lots of description before you finally get to what the whole sentence is actually about. And that, in microcosm, is what the actual novel does in 6 or 7 volumes. You have to, so my disappointment and frustration with life regarding Proust is that so many people get put off by the very, very slow beginning, when actually that slow beginning is necessary to set up the whole 6, 7 volumes. And so it's just this absolutely beautiful. It's like fractal mathematics, the way his sentences replicate the overall structure of the huge book. It's almost like at a cellular level that he achieves it. And I just find that, and to put that in musical terms, there's a constant reference to this little piece of music by this school teacher, music teacher, Von Teur, and that acts as a motif all the way through the novel. And when when Monsieur Swann is pursuing a debt, it's through the medium of this song, or this piece of music. And that various themes that Proust develops over the 7 volumes it weaves in and out. The epiphanies that he has are like this motif of music. And so there's just the technical brilliance. And I also like the way in which these sentences, there are various novels I can think of. So I remember, I think someone on my channel might have said they read Frankenstein and they were shocked at how well written it was. And she's not actually one of my favourite writers, but the other one I would think of is Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. It's beautifully written in a way that I honestly think modern writers cannot replicate, because these were people who had been immersed, brought up with the King James version of the Bible that they knew almost off by heart. All they had, and they wrote letters to each other all the time, not text, not emails, not rude pictures that you sent me, Stuart.
Little. You really know how to ruin someone's train of thought. There's an image I do not want to have in my head.
It's one of my preternatural gifts, Darren. Have you not watched my channel before?
I don't even know what I was going to say there. I'm just going to withdraw.
No, I've been doing monologues on my channel, and I heckle myself. So don't you feel like you've been put upon? Anyway, come on, save us, Stuart, from this inanity.
No, I was just thinking about Channel 4, actually. In the 70s and 80s, obviously Channel 4 came out in the 80s, but the 90s, Channel 4 was the place to be late at night, wasn't it? With Euro trash in the French.
See, you're making this smutty. We're talking about Emily Bronte, Wuthering Heights, Frankenstein.
Yeah, talking about Wuthering Heights, actually. There's a new film out that's dreadful. Going back to what you said, Paul, about everything being sterilized and in the modern world. So I have never read Wuthering Heights. I know roughly what the plot's about.
But you've listened to Kate Bush.
Yeah, I've heard the song.
Well, for you that counts. Come on,
and
don't put yourself down.
We were going to do karaoke in the club style, Vic and Bob club style. But from what I understand, is the plot of Wuthering Heights is very dark. It's about abusive relationships. It's about there's a kind of an element of necrophilia in there as well at one point. And this new version of the film is like a Netflix sterilization. It's like a standard love story, and it doesn't really.
And can I just throw in there? It's not totally established, but Heathcliff is found on the streets of Liverpool, so he could be a Scouser, which explains a lot.
Deviant.
It's there have been many different. I haven't seen the new version, so I can't comment. I don't know. I'll just go with what you're saying, and chances are I won't watch it. Reason being, I mean, I've watched several versions. I remember one I think it was in the 90s. It calls himself Ralph Fiennes. To me, it's Ralph. I don't know why it's Ralph, but anyway, Ralph Fiennes. He was Heathcliff in it. Sometimes you'll get a good version, sometimes, but I don't. It's like a lot of things. Whether it's in the production, whether it's they want to change something, whether they want to do whatever. It's something I think never quite truly faithful to the book.
Yeah, it's a difficult book to kind of turn into a film by all accounts. Yeah.
Well, don't you think that's the saving grace of Proust, that it's just you couldn't turn the whole 7 volumes into a film? Thank God.
It's impossible. But I mean, you could get a very good film about human experience, about life. I mean, I'm thinking something like Terrence Malick, like Tree of Life or something like that, and you'll get cinemaphiles will be like, this is amazing. This shows how cinema is the best medium. But then you could say, well, look at the 4,000 pages of Proust. Don't you think Proust has done better in that? There's much more depth. There's much more detail. The language is fantastic. And I think you talk a lot in your channel, Paul, about, you know, literature and the kind of classic literature, established literature as having a lot of value.
Yeah, but the irony is, I'm not dissing visual art. It would be slightly ridiculous for someone whose channel uses an awful lot of it. But part of the reason, it's from coming from a communication studies background. My channel, right from the get-go, I always used visual art in combination with literature, because I thought it doesn't make sense to be on a visual medium like YouTube and not use images.
Yeah.
And that's what I find interesting. So I'm trying to basically sell literature to people, but I've had to prostitute myself by doing it using images, at least partially, because that's what the medium demands. And I think part of the problem with reading, and why the Proust, you know, I'm evangelical about people reading Proust, is reading Proust just on a very practical basis of finding a room on your own, turning off your bloody screens, and just reading Proust is a luxury in today's world. And there's an interiority. I think Proust describes it himself as almost like, and the irony is, you know, in a world where everyone's going on about safe spaces, there's an interiority in Proust where you go to this place. And he describes in the novel how the act of reading gives you a perspective on somebody else's perspective on life. There's a paragraph where he describes how you're introduced to infinite numbers of worlds of other people without having to leave your armchair, basically. And that, to me, even the best films, you're mentioning cinema, but even the best films, you're presented with curated images. And yes, in a novel, the words are curated for you, but your mind can go almost in endless directions, because it's the interaction of the curated thoughts and words with your active contributory imagination. Films take some of that away from you. And that's what I do. I just feel it scares me when I think, then it's in your bailiwick, Darren, this idea of, guess what? We live in an increasingly narcissistic society where people are trapped in their own interiority and struggle to recognize other people's. But guess what? When you read something as powerful as Proust, it's second nature to understand. There's nuance, there's complexity, other people see the world differently. All the things that nowadays, I just look around me and no one's listening to anyone. Politics is polarized beyond belief. It strikes me as just this antithesis of everything you find in the act of reading Proust. There endeth the lesson.
Well, if I just come back on that again, talking about the safe spaces, and one of the things I would say, in fact, I'm pretty sure I said this when we were all in Liverpool about a year or so ago, Paul, if you remember. I talk about four things. I know there's much more we could be looking at, but a minimum of four things. If you have maybe a bit of faith in yourself, a bit of confidence, okay, not arrogance, not overconfidence, but of a belief in yourself, you have a bit of faith in yourself. If you have a healthy level of humility, because you don't know everything, and some people can do things you can't, they have information you don't have. If you have a healthy level of resilience, which isn't just bouncing back from setbacks and things like that and failures, but it's your resourcefulness, it's your ability to navigate through and around different obstacles and even know when to just quit something, okay, if it's not good for you. And the last thing is a little bit of courage. Those four things, I believe, you can be your own safe space. You don't need people to wrap you in cotton wool, you know. And I would agree with you, whenever you're reading something, even reading something that you don't particularly like, or you're reading something that you disagree with, or whatever it is, you're under no obligation to agree with it and accept it as the normal, whatever. What does happen is you now have new information that you can internalize, you'll accept and negotiate it and accept it or reject it. So really, I guess things like reading, you can get it to some degree in movies, but I would agree that reading is maybe a more powerful medium for this. It's looking at maybe reconciling, challenging, whatever it is term you want to use, the difference between maybe your subjective perception of things, your inner reality, and just the world in general, reality as it is. And I think those four things
Yeah, but that specific point about the subjectivity, I find it interesting that just to give you a little excerpt for people who are new to the novel, you might have read the first early pages and gone beyond Stuart and I. But there's a bit where his grandmother is in the garden, and Proust is very good at portraying this is why I think he's a humorous writer as well as a dark writer. So his grandmother, who's this beatific person, she's in the garden and then she goes past a plant that's got a stick holding it up and she rips it out because she wants the plants to be free. And she wants to be outside all the time, even when it's raining, and she's an elderly lady. But when he describes the grandmother being in the garden, he gives about 4 or 5 reasons why she's in the garden. So even within an individual's interior subjectivity, there are mixed motives for anything. And throughout the novel, what he does is, in one whole volume, for example, Monsieur Swann is presented as this urbane person who's a friend of the Prince of Wales, rich, connected. In another book, he's one of the other volumes, he's seen from a completely different perspective by other people as a buffoon. Yeah. And that, I think, Proust does better than nearly any other writer I can think of. The same characters are presented in multifariously different ways. But Stuart, you're a part of the degenerate generation that depends upon film for all their references, like you've already done tonight. So could you defend your generation from its inability to read Proust, please?
Well, you would probably not read Proust at a university, as we talked about previously, because it's a very long text. I mean, you might find some universities, about Oxford, Cambridge, if you're doing masters in French literature, they might say, right, you have to read this because this is probably the most famous example of French literature. But I 100% agree. I mean, I grew up with books. I love books. I have a big collection of books compared to what my peers would have. And that comes down to having a family and an upbringing that also valued books. So my dad is an avid reader. He's got thousands upon thousands of books. The house is overflowing. Everything, history, novels, classics, things like that. So for me, it was always instilled in me. It's like, books are really, really good.
But can I ask you, because you're in a better position to judge this, and I'm guessing either... Well, actually, Darren's a bit weird because he's into science fiction and he's slightly degenerate too. But you are into anime, you're into film, and ironically, I taught cinema.
Yeah.
And it's like, I've had PTSD. I really don't like cinema anymore because I taught it. It feels like a stress every time I watch a film.
Paul, cruel irony is indeed a fickle master, is it not?
Yeah. But serious for a second, Stuart. You've got this dual perspective where I think you appreciate film and screen-based technology much more than I can.
Yeah.
But you also must be aware of the quite profound differences between the two.
Absolutely. I mean, the biggest example of that would be novels to film adaptation. Very, very, very few examples where the film is going to be better than the novel. I mean, that probably one of the only ones I can think of is Kubrick's Clockwork Orange. That's one where I think the book is good. I love the book, but the film really outshines the novel. But I think it's just due to going back to McLuhan, it's due to I guess the limits of the medium. It's like a novel. Yes, there's a commercial aspect to it, but I think a writer doesn't write a book thinking I'm writing this to make money. I mean, some kind of Mills and Boon type authors, yes, but I think a novelist will always have some artistic integrity, whereas a film, I mean, a lot of cinema output, especially nowadays, is a commercial enterprise. So you've got to think this needs to be a certain length, this needs to have a certain actor for pulling power, this needs to be in a certain genre because a certain genre is good at the moment. So just by that very aspect of commercial aspect of the media, it's obviously not going to be as detailed, it's not going to be as profound as literature.
Sorry to interrupt, Stuart, but Emma in the comments has been very funny. She just said 50 Shades was a better film. So, thank you, Emma, for dragging down in one comment the whole IQ level of the discussion. Shame on you.
That's actually a good comment. Just to bring in what Emma said, when we were looking at doing the worst novel of all time, The Alchemist, 50 Shades of Grey was one that came up. I was looking at a lot of Reddit comments about worst book of all time. 50 Shades of Grey unanimously. I don't think there's one person who enjoyed that book. in the Reddit comments I looked at. So I'll have to read. I have to check it out.
But you're stymied by the fact 50 Shades of Grey would be like reading your autobiography. So
too
something would
tame.
be lost with you. Yeah.
Too tame. That's beginner stuff.
I wonder, maybe there is a crossover, maybe there's a difference, I wonder. But whenever someone is writing a book, a novel, it's not to say they can't make it into a movie. It's been done many, many times. But I wonder, is the difference with a movie, especially these days, they're not necessarily looking for a movie as such. They're maybe looking for something that is going to kickstart a franchise.
Yeah, the whole IP war thing. Yeah, IP and merchandise. I mean, that goes back. I think. I mean, earlier than this, but I think the big example Darren given is Star Wars. Star Wars is cited. Yeah, Star Wars is cited as the franchise that kind of really showed up. Like an IP is very important, and I think there's a joke in Spaceballs, Mel Brooks' Spaceballs. There's a joke about Star Wars and IPs, and I think it's like Mel Brooks is like the Yoda character, and he opens up a door and there's all their merchandising, and he's like, yeah, no, this is more important than the actual film itself. So it's a bit of a play on that, but no, that it's very important nowadays, I think.
Before I forget, one of the things that is going to be interesting in the summer, because I respect him immensely as a director, but Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey. I think it's coming out is it July?
I didn't know it was being there.
I've seen a trailer. It's a huge amount of money was spent on it, and I'm not hopeful because guess what? I'm a pessimist by nature. But if anyone could give a decent go at it, you'd think Christopher Nolan. Because why I mention Christopher Nolan is it's a nice segue because one of his first films was Memento, which is all about memory in reverse, and a lot of his films, Inception, is about memory. The Aeneid is one of the themes in Inception from my failing memory. There is a whole. I just think Christopher Nolan is a really, as far as because we're talking about to what extent can literature be translated into film. I think Christopher Nolan's actually a very Proustian director, and it will be fascinating to see what he does with the Odyssey.
Yeah,
I was interested. I was never really big into superheroes. I was never a superhero fan in spite of the nerdy stuff over my shoulder. With the exception of Spider-Man when I was a kid, but everybody likes Spider-Man. I was never.
That's about bondage issues, Darren.
You said you wouldn't mention that.
He's doing a secret, so yeah.
No, Men in Tights.
I was interested. I was interested whenever he made the Batman movies. Not being a superhero fan, and I watched them and I actually enjoyed them because he didn't make him a superhero. He made him a vigilante. He made him a symbol, and that was very, very different from what I reckoned a superhero movie would have been. So I thought his take on the Batman stories was pretty good.
Darren, specific question. Have you got to the bit yet? I know it's early days for you in your Proustian journey, but have you got to the bit where Marcel's out the window and he sees the two lesbian lovers?
No, not yet. I have got to, where have I got to? Well, again, not being in chapters and things like that. If it's of any help, I'm at page 36.
Right, it's probably about 180 or something. Can you remember precisely where it was, Stuart? But anyway,
it's getting down to nearly about page 200, I think.
Yeah, there's this Michel Vonteur who writes the beautiful piece of music. He has a lesbian daughter, and lesbianism is a theme that runs throughout the novel. But he has a lesbian daughter, and in those days, this would have been an absolute, in terms of social face, this was terrible. But despite that, because he loved his daughter so much, he completely tolerated it, and her lover moved into the house. So socially, he was ostracized and embarrassed beyond belief, but he did it because he loved his daughter. Then he dies, and it's weird because Marcel's out in the bushes claiming he wasn't being a voyeur. Well, what are you doing in the bushes, Marcel? I've used that excuse, and it never worked for me in the Cumming Court case. But what he sees is they're frolicking around with a bit of lesbian lust going on. And at one point, the partner of the daughter spits or says, "I'm going to spit on your father's photograph." And it's in the midst of all this jolly hockey sticks, beautiful French countryside, little boy wandering around. It's an aspect of Proust I don't think's often recognised. The psychological horror that he describes. And later on, way into the several volumes, there's a character, Baron de Charlus, who's he's initially, and this is the thing about shifting perspectives, he's presented as this virile heterosexual man, and it turns out that he goes to male brothels, and his kink is to beat the living bejesus out of men, who he pays huge amounts of money for. And they have to, it's hilariously done though. This is the darkness. I'm sorry, I'm just giving away my sense of humor, but it's hilariously done to the extent that they have to tell him that they're the absolute scum of the earth. They're street urchins and stuff. And one of them fails to remember to tell this Baron de Charlus how low level he is, because he's actually not. And the Baron is devastated because he thought he was whipping this very socially low level person. So the depravity and the weirdness, but on top of all this, in real life, Proust put his auntie's old chaise longue in one of the male brothels, and he a brothel. I think it could have been a normal brothel, and he felt, guess what? He felt slightly guilty when he saw all these prostitutes using it for various depraved purposes. But also, the accusation was in a male brothel, and don't ask me how I know this level of detail, but in the male brothel, he actually had photos of his mother. And the implication was that it was a similar thing that he was describing with the two lesbian lovers. So there's some deep-rooted psychological, and Proust was, obsessed by his mother. And yet, he wanted her photograph, so she's there to see him at his most depraved. It's dark stuff.
It is, and what you described there, again, if I was looking at this through a Rogerian term, it's there's what's known as conditions of worth. Okay, I must be like this, I should be like that. And it's the things we do to be accepted by others, to be accepted by society, to be accepted by friends, family, loved ones, and so on. So again, we take these, you'd probably be more familiar with the term, something like a superego injunction.
Yeah.
Rogers would look at it as introjections, they're conditions of worth. Same-sex attraction back in those days was pretty much a taboo. It was, we don't do that. There's clearly, I don't know, fire and brimstone and all that sort of thing is going to happen. And yet this dad, who is aware of that, he has rejected those conditions of worth. He rejected them for his daughter and so on. So he's been ostracized as well. So there is a lot going on there. And I'm just wondering as well, you talk about, the furniture, it's his mother's, there's pictures everywhere and so on, and then he sees what these other prostitutes are doing. So on one hand, he's maybe been rejecting those conditions, but then as soon as he does, he starts to feel the consequences. As the conscience starts to hit him. Again, the superego injunction, what a polluted memory of mum or whatever. So,
but don't you think it also speaks to the idea that even depravity depends upon this tension between you're doing something wrong,
yes,
but that's what makes it enjoyable.
So it gets exciting, yeah.
But there's come a point when you realise, oops.
It's that tension between the real and the ideal. Again, the ideal is, like, I'm a good person. I'm a good person. I sing in the choir and I give to charity and I'm hardworking and all the rest of it. And then there's the other part that, as Jung would describe, maybe our shadow, the parts of us that don't fully integrate and we tend to deny and we keep them hidden. But every now and again, they're going to come out, and they might come out in a brothel or something like that.
Could I also point out, Darren, when you were talking about Rogering interjections, Stuart's eyebrows shot up.
No, I was going to say, Darren, it's interesting that you mentioned Jung, because obviously Jung's big thing was that we need to embrace this dark side. We need to embrace. Yes. Is it the like, I always forget which way to go. It goes around the anima and the animus. Is it the animus is the one we repress? That's the male energy that we repress. And I do wonder. I mean, this Proust was like pre-Jung, I think. I think
was,
Freud.
Yeah.
I think Jung
came after Freud. Yeah.
That's right, because Jung did his Red Book. I think it was just after World War II. Perhaps World War One, perhaps it's 1916, and then obviously after his Red Book, his kind of quasi-religious experience, then he really
wasn't Psychopathologies of Everyday Life, something like 1897, Interpretations of Dreams, or something like 1903.
Yeah, there was like the kind of the early Jung and then the later Jung, and
they're Freud.
Oh, sorry, that was Freud. Yeah, that's when he was corresponding with Freud. But then Jung really gets into this idea of, I think from my understanding of Freud, it was still kind of curative. It was like there are certain behaviors that are not acceptable, and we need to understand them to restrict them. Whereas Jung's kind of inversion was to say, well, no, that, I mean, these dark aspects, the reason why we have mental health issues, or certain mental health issues, is because of this repression of these dark sides, and we need to look into this negative aspect. So I wonder if this kind of foreshadowing of this within Proust, like he's tentatively exploring these negative emotions, these dark emotions, these repressed feelings. He can't do it overtly, but there's this kind of sense there that he feels they're important.
And as you mentioned, Paul, about dark humor, that's one of the ways things will come out. I mean, Freud would even have said that humor is one of the healthiest defense mechanisms we have, to be able to laugh at the ridiculous side of something, for instance. It said about embracing it, I think this is my interpretation on it, and this is the stuff that all comes afterwards, but I think it's more about integrating them rather than
keywords,
embracing them. It's about integrating them. We understand, there are parts of us that, sometimes you just want to slap somebody, but it's not appropriate. You're not going to do it, but you're aware, and that you don't really want to. It's just in that moment of really.
Darren, this is where you and I disagree, because I think deviant should be thrashed, but my problem is that they would thoroughly enjoy that. So I'm involved in this constant loop that I can't act upon because I don't want to give them pleasure. So I don't deny myself pleasure. But I'm not a masochist, so I don't enjoy denying myself pleasure. And around, le petit objet, I go, like a over the top amphetamine heavy hamster running around a wheel.
Paul, do you want to discuss this in our next session together? Because this is interesting. This hasn't come up before. We
Paul needs a couch session.
Yeah,
but not Proust manky couch.
We integrate those parts of us that are unacceptable, and they're not just unacceptable to ourselves; they are unacceptable to others as well. There was again going back to maybe a movie. A good way of illustrating that was, did you see the Joker movie, the one that
Joaquin Phoenix, the first one,
That's an example of someone who is trying very hard. He's trying to be the ideal. You be a nice person, you be funny and all that. Now he is kind of delusional, and the movie's a bit disjointed because you don't know what is his fantasy and what's real. Sometimes it's a little disjointed. But whenever he shoots the guy on the train, and then there's pictures of him everywhere, what he starts to see is the love and the admiration and the attention and all that sort of thing that he had been wanting for years. To be a good person, to be a comedian, to make people laugh. He got that through an act of violence.
Yeah.
So what he does is he goes into his shadow self, and all those other parts of him start to come out, and he embraces them more and more. And that's a very dark version of embracing your shadow self, but I think it's a really good illustration of it.
Yeah, great example.
There's a bit about I'm just thinking now about the structure of the novel, because again, I mentioned how in a microcosm level he replicates that at the broader level, but there's also the theme of social climbing. So it starts off at Combray, at his grandmother and auntie's house. It's middle class, but it's quite homely. And you get the sense Swan visits them as a bit of relief from all the incredibly haute bourgeois and aristocratic circles he normally mixes in. So it's much more like a homely atmosphere for him to enjoy. But as you go along, every dinner party or every key set piece dinner party gets to a higher social level. And at the very final volume, it's the Princess de Guermantes is the highest level, and that's where he has this epiphany that he needs to be a writer. But it's interesting, he climbs up, and at every level, the people become more despicable and unlikable, and the backbiting and the hypocrisy. And for someone who was borderline snob himself, Proust, I think, is absolutely brilliant at seeing the social mores and behavior and the hypocrisy behind them. And again, this idea of how does it relate to our current climate? I think we're living in a time where whatever part of the political spectrum you're on, there's this censorship. People can't say. The Overton window has gone to such a small degree before people start shouting at you, you can't say that. And that there's I came across that. Is it the novel Gilead by Marilyn Robinson, where at the very end of the novel, there's this really mild-mannered father, and he tells his son he's giving him his best writings, and he basically says, he describes his own writing, I'm thinking from memory, but it's something along the lines of, these were the things I thought were true, and I wrote about them, and it was good. And I think to some extent, despite the complexity of the novel, that's what Proust does. He writes what he sees to be the truth from multiple perspectives. But we're living in a time where no one says anything remotely truthful because everyone's terrified. There are, speech laws left, right, and centre. And I just think it's an underestimated aspect of the whole censorship of free speech in the world at the moment. This inability to write or speak honestly. I think you're the psychological expert. But I think that repressing that ability to speak truthfully as you see it is profoundly harmful.
There's when we suppress things now, sometimes we need to suppress something in order to get through something. So we might be afraid of something or whatever. So we suppress our fear to do what it is we need to do. In the short term, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If that's something we have to continually do, if we keep on suppressing things, we suppress our anxieties, our fears, our anger, whatever it is, the more we bury them, they become internalized. And what often happens is that's when we start to ruminate, we start to overanalyze. That's when we start to catastrophize and things like that. And what you often find is it will leak out in different areas. Now, sometimes when it's internalized, it can become quite corrosive. So it will start to become, resentful, Paul. And I
haven't internalized anything.
other times what can happen is it can become quite dulled. So it comes out as low mood, depression, anxiety, and things like that. So in the short term, yes, it's not necessarily a bad idea. Sometimes we do need to filter how we're going to say something as opposed to maybe censor ourselves. But the more we suppress things, they don't go away. It's like I was saying to Ed one time, we were on his channel, it's like whenever something is in our head and we're constantly over analyzing and ruminating, it's like you've got a head like a TARDIS. It's so much bigger on the inside. And the worse it gets, and that's going to, as I say, it's going to leak into other areas. That'll leak into our relationships. That will leak into how we interact with others. That will leak into even how we appraise certain situations.
Stuart, how do you think that will apply to you, given that your head is like a dark, dank cellar with just a bit of dust at the bottom?
Oh God.
Not that was a leading question.
Yeah, no comment on a personal level, but I would say I think one of the issues now is that we've lost the ability to really listen to the other side. So it's not just that we are kind of self-critical of what we think or kind of self-censoring. It's that the societal and we want to talk politically, the political frameworks where two sides with different positions can get together and come to a compromise. That just seems to have dropped away. And I mean, there's many different examples and reasons given for it. Is it social media polarization? Is there an economic aspect? Are we seeing the collapse of the social contract with capitalism and neoliberalism? I mean, I don't know. It's beyond my expertise, but I would say we do seem to see more and more extreme examples. I mean, even in Parliament, if you look at videos of the UK Parliament going back to the 80s, even the early 90s, there's there's a kind of a aspect of duel between two political parties, but it's constrained by norms. So you can say what you want within reason. You're not censoring. You can give your opinion, but it's within reason. Whereas nowadays we seem to have, reasoned, educated opinions are drowned out by extremism on both sides of the political fence.
There was. Sorry, I thought you'd finished it.
No, finished, Dan. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that it's interesting. As you were saying, that what came to mind was back during the 90s, and it was just prior to Tony Blair. The Labour leader, wasn't it John Brown? Wasn't he called? If I remember.
No, it was. Oh, I saw it. I didn't actually speak to him, but I was getting my train at John Smith.
Was it
John
Smith?
It was John Smith. I bumped into him at Edinburgh train station. I was going in to go to Liverpool, and he was coming out because I think he lived in. He was coming. I think he lived in Edinburgh. He was coming up from Westminster.
Well, I thought it was interesting that whenever he died, John Major, the then Prime Minister, they asked him what it felt like, something along the lines of, a political enemy has died. And John Major corrected the interview, said he was not an enemy. John was not an enemy. He was an opponent.
Darren, I think that's a really interesting point, because I mentioned in another context, John Smith, I think, was the last good politician in a certain sense, because he was universally admired. And I mentioned I was in Edinburgh and I was looking out my first floor window of this flat on the Royal Mile, and I saw Francois Mitterrand coming. He was weird, because I've done this video on Dracula. He had a fur-lined collar and a long black coat. And I think, in retrospect, he was suffering from prostate cancer. I think that's what, I might be wrong, I think that's what finished him off. But he would have had it then. I think it was around about 92 I saw him. So he's coming down this road, and it was bright sun on a winter's day from memory. And I thought, I got the sense, I must have only been about 40 odd yards across the road, but just pure evil. But when I bumped into John Smith, he just exuded bonhomie, and you got a nice feeling. And I'm not a woo-woo person. I don't believe in auras or Shankra or any of this. But this idea that actually, from what Stuart's saying, that aura of decency is something I think we've lost. And Mitterrand was the opposite. He was, you could smell the sulphur in the Edinburgh air. He was a bad guy. You could just viscerally feel it, or I've just lost the plot.
I thought it was interesting. Again, it's been so long from it. I heard it, but it's sort of paraphrased, and I hope I don't misremember it. But John Major was saying he wasn't an enemy; he was an opponent. So you have to remember that, John Smith and the Labour Party, they want what's best for Britain and the British people, the same as we do. We just have a different way of going about it. That does not make us enemies. It just makes us opponents. Can you imagine hearing something like that today? Wow. Could you imagine? If Trump,
very, very, very rare.
Yeah. Could you imagine if Trump died in office? Could you imagine hearing something like that from the opposite side? Could you imagine if something happened to Keir Starmer? Could you imagine? Do you know what I mean? It's wow.
But then from a different point of view, Stuart and I actively are enemies. So times change.
Well, yeah, another thing that's just come to mind again this evening. I kind of feel I'm leaning very much towards Carl Rogers tonight. When he's in Proust and he's talking about the social climbing, another aspect of that are those conditions of work, the things you have to do, the things you have to be like in order to maybe climb that hierarchy, in order to get up that social ladder. But then there's the other part of him, the real him, that recognizes the hypocrisy. So it's the distance between recognizing the hypocrisy and yet wanting to do it in order to climb the hierarchy. It's again that distance in between that would be described as incongruence, and that's where we get all those feelings like frustration, anxiety, anger, all those things we don't particularly want to feel, because we can't reconcile the two. I don't like this, but maybe I have to do it in order to get up the hierarchy. But as I'm getting up the hierarchy, I'm not feeling any better because of all the hypocrisy. So it's like a feedback loop.
Yeah, I think Japanese culture's got a very similar concept with that. It's kind of very ingrained in their society. It's that you have your social self, and you understand that that's not often good, and then you have your personal self. So you still retain your personal integrity, even though you maybe have to do something at work, or you have to do something.
Your core remains the same. Yeah,
exactly. And I can't remember the exact words, but there's a word to explain and express the pain of that. it's like your true self, it feels a kind of slight pain when they have to kind of go against like your core beliefs.
But with reference to Proust, I think this is interesting because there are elements of the psychological acuity. He gives, for example, he wants to see, when he's still a young boy, the narrator is Marcel, he wants to see Gilbert, and he plays with her at the Champs-Élysées park on a daily basis, and his grandmother hasn't come back, and without her he can't go and see her. And he the way he describes it is he thinks, if she's being run down in the street, I won't be able to see Gilbert. And this is the most beautiful grandmother that's ever walked the face of the earth. And he's so selfishly obsessed. All he can think about is, oh shit, if she dies, I can't see my little fancy lady. That level of psychological acuity, the way in which, and then even with the waiting for the mother's kiss, he realizes he's won, but at the cost of his mother's face, in your term, Stuart. So at the most basic level, even as a child, he's beginning to learn that the most basic desires come at some type of psychological price for someone.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting.
It's interesting, as a child, we do tend to be very egocentric as children, and we tend to grow out of that as we grow older. And we learn about people, we learn about the world, we learn about the world around us, and so on. We start to maintain friendships with others. But there is still part of us that it's still there. Again, going back to Jung and the shadow self, we don't integrate that and recognize there is part of us sometimes. Okay, I mentioned Jung a moment ago, maybe Freud. Recognize our id. Our id has that instant gratification, that libido, that quick dopamine hit, that quick fix or whatever, and the id isn't always thinking about consequences or what it's going to cost other people.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that, if you were to lean very much towards the id, that's where we do become self-absorbed. That's where we do become selfish. That's where maybe we have low impulse control. Maybe you're going into the realms of psychopathy and things like that. If you lean too much towards the superego, you'd be afraid to get out of bed, because it's always going to be the wrong thing. You're always going to be second guessing yourself and questioning yourself. So it's as our mutual friend Richard, who isn't here tonight, would often say, it's about balance. He talks about the yin and the yang. I talk about balance. It's trying to find a balance between the two. That's what
I like the id, the superego, all these things. There's the character Francoise, who's basically the servant that they inherit from the aunt, and it's hilarious because did you get to the bit where they're in Combray because they visit at a certain time of the year? It might be Easter, and they're having asparagus every day, and then you find out they're having asparagus because the scullery maid, who Francoise can't stand, is allergic to asparagus. And that spoke to me, because that's the type of thing I do. But it's just the casual cruelty that's quite imaginative all the way through. And then there's a bit where he has one of his epiphanies in a public toilet, in not in a filthy way, but when he's still a young boy in the Champs-Élysées, and there's what would you call it? The attendant. And she's referred to as the Marquise of the water closet. So there's all this social climbing. And then later on, he goes back as an adult and she remembers him and lets him use a cubicle for free. But she's called the Marquise of the water closet, which is the lowest possible job I can imagine. And yet there's still this weird hierarchy in Proust. He had such a forensic ability to trace social levels. And that's something maybe that has changed drastically from today, because it now seems that you've got the Epstein-like cabal at the very top of the pyramid, and then there's just huge swathe of middle-class, rats in a sack. We don't seem to have the social gradations that they did.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Paul. Going right back to the start of this talk when we were talking about accessibility of Proust. one thing I thought before I read it was that this is going to be difficult to read because of that kind of like alien social aspect, these different multi-levels. And I think that the edition that I have has a lot of material at the start explaining what France was like during the time, explaining the social hierarchy. But once I got into it, I just found it fascinating. In a sense, it made it more interesting than the novel, because, like you say, you look at current day and think, well, today's actually really quite flat and boring. Like you say, you have elites at the top, and then there's the rest of us like rats in a sack. Whereas in Proust's time, it was this very, very complex kind of social layer. Even within the elites, you had elites of elites of elites of elites up to the aristocracy, which is it's fascinating.
I'm trying to. I basically said everything I want to, so you two need to. We've been given a good rogering by Darren.
Your homework is to read On Becoming a Person by Carl Rogers.
On Becoming a Right, I'll write that down.
Oh, he's going to do it, actually. Okay.
No, I can't stand not having read something that someone else has, and they can hold it over me. So,
okay.
I'm a competitive literary snob. So I'm going to read this inside out and like ask you about what did you mean on page 87, Darren?
It's a memory of an elephant.
When I had, it was required reading when I was at uni. It was required reading for the course, and I was reading it, and we were asked to describe exactly the question like that. What did he mean by on, when he mentioned this and that page? So person I was working with in this little group of two, we were reading through what he was talking about, and we said, well, what he means is this and what he means is that, and if you look at this, the plan, and we finished it all with probably.
So is there anything else in Carl Roger that would be applicable to Proust other than the ideal versus real?
No, it's not that he's overly applicable to Proust. You could you could look at Erikson, more behavioral, sort of the grandfather of CBT, if you know what I mean. Looking at beliefs, where we get the beliefs from, core beliefs and the underlying assumptions and so on. Again, with Jung and Freud and people like that, you're looking at the id and the superego. But I just thought that Carl Rogers, his reading isn't always easy to understand, but his concepts are very easy if you just look at the difference between the real and the ideal. If you look at things like those introjections, those conditions of worth, if you look at the incongruence between authenticity and incongruence and inauthenticity, trying to be a version of yourself that you're not. It makes perfect sense in a lot of stuff that I've been looking at. Again, the difference between the voluntary and the involuntary memory, I mentioned at the very beginning. A lot of times things just pop into our head. They do it randomly, and we remember things through association. Now, an example, I guess, could be you're listening to the radio and a song comes on. Maybe you haven't heard that song since you were at school. Years old, you haven't heard it, and all of a sudden you remember it. You don't just remember the song. You remember school. You remember being at school. You remember the friends that you were hanging around with. You remember someone maybe you had a crush on or whatever. You also start to remember how it felt. So it's like a cue. Okay, so you start to remember these things. Your mind might start to wander. If it's something deeply unpleasant, like the song reminds you of a horrible event, the bully that beat you up and took your dinner money and stuff like that, we don't like it, so it becomes what's known as an intrusive memory, an intrusive thought. So we'll turn the radio off, we'll change the station and things like that, because we don't want to be remembered. Rogers would have looked at the difference between the voluntary and the involuntary. When it's involuntary, sometimes it can be pleasant, it's a nice thing, but if it's something that's deeply unpleasant, there's that part of us that tells us, I shouldn't be thinking this, or I shouldn't be feeling this, when in reality, it's a normal human emotion, it's a normal human association with something. I've probably waffled a bit too much there, but I hope you get the concept.
No, I'm going to look at the Rogers stuff, because I am interested in how the various different I just find him an immensely psychological writer. So, for example, I mentioned earlier Combray as this childhood Eden, but the concept of the Swan's Way and they take 2 walks, and one of them is more enjoyable but longer, and they get back later, and so he can never decide as a child which one he likes best. But that is almost like the paths he takes through life. Those foundational memories stay with him.
Yeah.
But they're exactly that. They're foundational. And this was my point earlier. What I fear for younger people is that they don't have access to that type of foundational memory. I always think of it. It sounds, because I think, Stuart, you said you grew up on the Isle of Man, didn't you?
North Yorkshire, but I lived on the Isle of Man
Yeah.
when I was a teenager.
Yeah, but you've got memories of actually being out there in nature and stuff, and actually having a physical reality. But
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
kids who are just interacting with screens at this formative period of their life, it couldn't be more different to what Marcel's doing in the book.
But there's a deeper point in that, Paul. One of the big things about Proust and his involuntary memories is smell, taste, and touch.
Yeah.
And that comes from having an outdoor experience as a child. Nowadays, kids who have screens, computers, they're always connected to social media. That's a visual and audio medium. There's no touch there. I mean, I know there's new devices coming through, prohibitively expensive, but a kid that engages only with Xbox or mobile phone doesn't have that full range of human experience.
Well, that's interesting you say that, because most what you would call a trigger, if you want to call it that, sometimes it's not a trigger, it's just a cue.
Yeah.
But sometimes, even if it is something unpleasant, something traumatic, it is always something external, and it is something sensory. It's a sight, a sound, a touch, a smell, and that's something Proust described really, really well. It is the sensory thing that triggers the memory or triggers the emotion or whatever, and then we go off on the how one thing leads to another and so on. But yeah, it's interesting.
Well, just to back that up, Darren, before I forget, there's a bit where his grandmother or his auntie is giving him, I think it's his grandmother, is giving him photographs of great works of art, and then she ends up giving him pictures of woodcuts. It's because she realizes the photographs don't do justice to the artwork, but it's also of a time when I think we absolutely take for granted we can buy expensively produced art books. We can see highly sophisticated reproductive photographs of great works of art. We have much more mobility. We can travel the world and see art in great galleries. A lot of these options weren't open to a French person at that time. But the way she describes so she stops giving him photographs of art, because she knows something's lacking in the photograph. And that's another thing I find fascinating about the novel. He's writing it at the cusp of the world becoming much more technologically mediated. So early on, I think there's a bit where he's in the street as a child, and the corsairs, these cavalry, go by. And it's a narrow street, so everyone has to hug the wall as these men on horses go by. But that's like the end of an era that, not long after there will be the First World War and the first use of tanks. There'll be chemical weapons, all of these things. Electric lights at the end of the late 1800s were coming into Paris. The telegram, the photographs had only been around since 1848-ish. You've got, cinema. As Proust is about to die, cinema's out. All of these things, it coincided. I think you could say this about lots of people now. Their lives coincide with great technological change. But I do think Proust saw two sides of the technological divide. The Impressionists, all those idyllic paintings of the French countryside, that's what Combray is about. He witnessed that. And then he also got to see an increasingly technologized Paris. And the novel weaves in and out of the dense urban Paris and Baalbec, the Normandy town on the coast, and Combray, which is interior. So you get the countryside and the town, really beautifully done.
I'm wondering as well, then, again, when you think of even the title, In Search of Lost Time, when things are changing around us, again, I mentioned earlier on only 4 TV channels when I was a kid, and nowadays I could pretty much tell an AI machine to make me a program about whatever. If I knew what it was doing, it would probably do it, There is something about the nostalgia. There is something about maybe what we yearn for is maybe a simpler time, something we recognized when we were younger.
Yeah, I agree, Darren. Yeah, it's actually interesting that, because I think Proust's like focus on childhood and why he devotes so much time setting the scene in childhood is so important, because it's almost as though childhood for him is like the psychic structure, like as we talked about before, having something to hold it together. And so many people, I mean, I do it myself, we look back and say, oh, it was so much better than when we were kids. Every generation does that. My parents said it was so much better when we were kids. My grandparents said it was so much better when we were kids. So probably if I knew my great grandparents,
they would say as well. But Stuart, could I push back on that? Because there are measurable epochs in society when not a lot changed for hundreds of years.
True.
So technologically, a peasant in France from the end of the French Revolution to not that long before Proust was a young boy, their lives wouldn't be. I'm thinking of there's a Pissarro painting of a cabbage field, and one of the messages is the timelessness of the countryside.
That's true, but take technology out of the equation, Paul. I mean,
maybe you can't. I dispute that. That's my problem. That technology has completely ruined that rural idyll.
That's
it's
interesting.
Gone.
Yeah.
No, I'm not making it up.
I understand it. Yeah, it's an interesting point.
You just think like you could do it yourself. Look at a book of Impressionist paintings and go and try and find those landscapes in modern France. You can't do it.
But that's going to be interesting. So the next generation, Generation Alpha, I think it's called now, it would be very interesting. This is the generation that's fully connected to technology. I mean, Gen Z has been fully connected to social media, but Generation Alpha are the kids that are just connected 24/7 now. It will be very interesting, whatever technological advancements come in their lifetime, whether they say, "Oh, it was so much better when we were kids," hooked up to Xbox 24/7.
Well, can I give you a specific example from my personal lived experience? When I was growing up, and Darren might be able to talk to this, Sundays, nothing was open.
That's right.
The shops were completely shut by law.
The pub would open for a couple of hours.
The pubs had limited opening hours. Yeah. And that actually, I remember when I've gone back to Liverpool, I only go back periodically. So I've got memories, acute memories having grown up in Liverpool. And one little thing is, A, the size of the cars has radically changed. They're all 4x4s, double parked. And B, I remember I saw roads that I used to walk with my dogs as a kid that you'd see a car every 5 minutes. And now there's a constant thrum of cars going by. I live in the countryside and decade on decade, you see more and more cars. So I'm not making, things were, you could argue whether they were worse or better, but I can definitely tell you they were quieter. They were less busy. There weren't 24/7 deliveries. There wasn't Deliveroo. All of this, the pace of life was measurably slower.
I think whether it's a question of whether it's better or whether it's worse, I think for every generation, what they recognize it is different. It's just different. Again, going back to the nostalgia, we want maybe a simpler age. We want an age or a time when we felt a bit more familiar. We felt a bit more secure in ourselves.
Yeah, I think what I'm pushing back against is the idea that automatically all historical periods are the same in terms of good or bad. I do think there are shitty periods of history to live in. I wouldn't have liked to live during the bubonic plague. We're living through a digital equivalent.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a perfect note to end on. Well, I'll leave you both. I'll leave you both with a quote, and it's one that I shared with you when we were talking about War of the Worlds, Paul. It's an H.G. Wells quote. He talked about about how we all have our time machines. Those that carry us back are our memories, and those that carry us forward are our dreams.
Oh,
that's nice.
Typical like Darren has to ruin everything with woo-woo nonsense, just as I'd ended on the bubonic plague. Pox on you, Darren.
Back to your stellar Taylor.
No, but seriously, thank you for giving us a good Rogering. I will remember that. And just that thank you to both Stuart and Darren, and I'm sure the three of us in some shape or form will see you all in the imminent future.
Absolutely. Let's promote tomorrow, Paul. We need to promote our show tomorrow.
For those that who want a bit of a giggle, I found out by pure chance that Stuart's favourite book in the world is The Alchemist by Paul Coelho. And I couldn't believe this. So Stuart got a bit shirty and said, let's discuss it. And we've got the guy James Cox will be on with us. And James and I think it's a terrible, terrible book. Stuart gets quite defensive and aggressive defending it. So we're going to do a read through of The Alchemist. Yep. And it promises to be quite, despite Stuart's lack of humour, I think it could be quite a funny event.
I think it's going to be good fun. Yeah, we'll see you there. And remember to like and subscribe, everyone. Paul forgets.
I never say that. No, I don't forget. I object. I will not prostitute myself like a debt for Monsieur Swan. People will do that if they want to, but they shouldn't be harangued by cheap floozies like you, Stuart.
Oh, you will do it. You'll just do it in a more under the radar kind of way.
Yeah, a manipulative Svengali type way, but you don't actually say it.
Yeah.
Right, so
like and subscribe.
Yeah, Stuart and I will see you tomorrow. What time is it, Stuart?
It's a bit later. I think for me it's
8 o'clock. It's 8 o'clock UK time, which is proper British Empire time. We invented time, Greenwich Mean Time. God save the king.
Spain should be on Greenwich Mean Time, though. I think we talked about this. Yeah, we should be on Greenwich Mean Time.
We will see you with Darren at some point in the future, but also remember tomorrow, 8 o'clock. All the very best. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.